Jaya Yasodhanandana, Jaya Braja Janaranjana. Jaya Yasodhanandana, Jaya Braja Janaranjana. Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari, Jaya Kunja Bihari. Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari, Jaya Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari. Srila Prabhupada ki, Go Premanandi. So today, reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, chapter 10. We're doing text 27, 28, and 29. I want to chant text 27 because I thought it's a good verse to kind of summarize where we are, because once these 3 texts are finished, we then go on to a new section. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vaikritastraya evete. Vaikritastraya evete. Devasargascha satama. Devasargascha satama. Vaikarikastuya prokta. Vaikarikastuya prokta. Komarastu bayamaka. Komarastu bayatmaka. Vaikritastraya evete. Devasargascha Vaikarikastuya prokta. Prokta. Komarastu bayatmakaha. Ladies? Vaikritastraya evete Devasargascha satama Vaikarikastuya prokta Komarastu bayatmakaha Vaikritastraya evete Devasargascha satama Rastu Vyatmakaha Vaikritastraya evete Devasargascha satama Vaikarikastuya prokta Rastu Vyatmakaha Vaikritaha, creations of Brahma. Trayaha, three kinds. Eva, certainly. Ete, all these. Devasaga, appearance of the demigods. Cha, also. Satama, O good Vidura. Vaikarika, creation of demigods by nature. To, but. Yaha, which. Proktaha, described before. Komaraha, the four Kumaras. To, but. Ubaya Atmakaha, both ways, namely Vaikrita and Prakrita. Translation. O good Vidura, these last three creations and the creation of demigods, the 10th creation, are Vaikrita creations, which are different from the previously described Prakrita, natural creations. The appearance of the Kumaras is both. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Amalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachani Nevashesha Shanivari Paschatya Desha Tarine. So I thought this is an opportunity just to recap where we are. This verse is referring to two types of creations. One is called the Prakrita and the other one is called the Vaikrita. And the Prakrita is something that kind of goes on, you could say, automatically by nature. And Maya Jakshena Prakrite Suyate Sacharacharam. It's kind of going on under the Lord's supervision, but it has its own kind of practical, or you could say, natural sequence of events. And then there's what's been called the Vaikrita, which is where Lord Brahma, he plays a more active role in generating, and that comes then to the species. And it kind of occurred to me that this is something that we can experience ourselves. In fact, we do experience it every day, this type of transition from one state of existence to another. For example, the first one is described as Mahat Sarga. They're all sargas been described. And the first sarga is basically everything. All the ingredients of everything is just there. It exists. It's the Mahat Tattva. It's placed there. By the way, there's nothing here about evolution. Evolution is not described in the Bhagavatam. Describing something very, very different than the way we were all taught at school. So it requires a kind of recalibration of the mind to rethink about these things. So what this is saying is that everything that's going to be everything that's going to manifest itself is already kind of there in its subtle form, in its Shakti form. And this is kind of all unidentified in the Mahat Tattva. It's the external material energy. It's kind of there, and it's working by its own internal, you could say, codes of operation. And the next thing So, for example, just before you wake up, you're in deep unconsciousness. For all intents and purposes, you're dead. You basically don't exist. You're not aware of existence when you're unconscious. And then when you wake up, the next thing is you become aware of yourself. Something happens, you become aware. Therefore, the next one is aham, is the next level. It's interesting because it's not described as in that particular Srila Prabhupada. It's not described there ahamkara. The word is aham. So it's kind of interesting because what you think you are comes later. But your first sense is you exist. You have a sense of I exist. So this is the next stage. So you've got the total amalgamate, everything. Then there's awareness that you exist. And the next thing is bhuta sarga. And this means that that's where things start to be. And things become to be, and then they also don't come to be. And that's the material world. Anything that's created, anything that kind of manifests or becomes, will also not become. It will stop being what it is. So therefore we're kind of conscious of ourselves, and we realize that we are transitory in nature. This is the bhuta sarga. The next stage is called the Indriya sarga, and that's got two phases. One is the jnana, and the other one is called the kriya. So two aspects. One is that the first one is kriya. You start to become aware of your own limbs, your hands, your legs, your belly, your tongue, your genitals. And these start to kind of play a part in your life. As soon as you wake up in the morning, you start to think about these things. And then there's the kind of knowledge-acquiring senses that give you information about how to function in this world. So these are all kind of there, you could say, they're existing. In other words, all around the universe, there is this working senses. It's part of the subtle fabric of the universe. It's there. And wherever you go, you see it manifested. In fact, one of the arguments, I'm not going to get into it, it's not my main topic, but one of the things that Srila Prabhupada said is that when they went to the moon or whatever, he said, where are the cities? Where are the living entities? And he made the point that wherever you go on this earth, you find living entities. So if they went there and they didn't find living entities, that means they didn't go there. So this verse indicates that all around the universe, there is this energy of activity, the kriya indriyas, and there's the jnana indriya, the kind of knowledge-acquiring senses. They're everywhere in the universe, and it manifests in different forms. And this is what the forms we'll be hearing about shortly. So this is also what we also experience. We wake up in the morning, and things start kicking in. And the next one is deva sarga, and that's why this verse is kind of important, because it's talking about two kinds of devas. This deva sarga here is part of this prakrita. It's part of, you could say, the fabric of the universe, which is kind of happening automatically. And it kind of ties in with us. We've heard that verse many times. How's it go? There's the, how's it go? Adibhautika klesh, Adyamika klesh, and Idaivika klesh. These three things, ourself, we exist, everything else around us, and then there's the demigods, which kind of knits the whole thing together. One doesn't exist without connection with the other. So these demigods are there. But it's kind of a subtle, they're existing, and they're part of how everything kind of collates together. And one aspect there is about the mind, and we know that verse, well, we may remember that verse, Manaha Shastri Indriyani Prakriti Stani Kashati, the six senses, which includes the mind. So the mind is kind of the knitting point. It knits all the senses together. So this is what that Deva Sarga creation is. And the next thing is important, Tamasarga. And this is quite unique, you could say, in our philosophy. And actually the Lord creates ignorance. In other words, if you want to enjoy the world, you need a bit of ignorance. There's that saying, ignorance is bliss. So if you really want to get into the material world, you've got to be a bit dark, because the truth doesn't allow you to enjoy the world ignorantly, because wisdom drives you to a certain kind of set of actions. So we're going to hear all about all these kind of bodies and their manifestations of different types of this ignorance. So ignorance is a gift of the Lord to allow us to live our life without necessarily thinking about him. So it's a way to enjoy life. Now, sometimes people ask in other groups, well, why is God making suffering? Well, it's going to get even more complex when we get into the devas. But here it is described that the ignorance is a manifestation of the law. It's a creation of how the universe exists, and it's part of this kind of automatic cycle. Not automatic in the words, it's not doing blindly. It's controlled by the Supreme Lord, again, Mayak Jak Shena, by superintendents. For example, when you set something up, then sometimes just your presence going around in that area with people is enough to get them to think about what they're doing. So this material world is set up, and just by the Lord's superintendence, it goes on seemingly automatically, but there's a kind of practical system in place there. So this is what's been described. So now, and what's interesting here is the Kumaras, the four Kumaras, are in both. They're part of this Prakrita and Vikrita. They're part of this kind of natural process of universal creation, and they're also part of the manifestation of Lord Brahma. And we know they're not ordinary living entities because they were able to go and knock on the door of Vaikuntha. they could go there. So they clearly weren't jiva atmas like ourselves. Oh, just go back, track a bit. When it says Bhuta Sarga, it's not talking about the generation of the living beings. The soul, as we know from the Bhagavad Gita, is eternal. Na tveva ham jatu nasam na... Give me that verse, please. Okay. Never was a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So Krishna is telling us that I'm eternal, you're eternal, and everyone else is eternal. So this is not, when it says Bhuta Sarga, it's not talking about the generation or the creation of the living beings. It's talking about the bodies or the beings that the soul inhabits. Okay, and then it comes into, now we come into the elements of Lord Brahma. What did Lord Brahma generate? And there's some points of interest which I want to kind of just touch on. The Srimad Bhagavatam is perfect, and we're all benefited by it, and we read it, and we can go back to Godhead. But we're also meant to study it. And when you study it, you find things that sometimes need a little more clarification. So I've been doing a little studying in things, anything to do with cows. So there's a couple of things that came up in here that tweaked my intrigue. And I'm going to refer to, some verse we touched yesterday. And what is happening is we're hearing about the different types of living beings. We heard about the plants, and then we heard about different kinds of animals. And there are animals described as Divi Shapa, which means two toes. And they were described as being cows, goats, buffaloes, Krishna stag, hog, Gavaya animal, deer, lamb, and camel all have two hooves. Now a Gavaya, it's interesting because Gavaya means it's like almost like a cow. And if you look at it, it's almost like a cow. It's like a big, huge thing. And it's got a very thin, long ridge of a hump on its back. So it's interesting it's not a cow, because what is a cow? There's often controversies today. What is a cow? Are Holsteins or Jerseys a cow? Are only animals with humps cows? So it's kind of a relevant topic. And in terms of cow protection, what is a cow? You may know or not know that sometimes in politics, especially in India, where we look to have them manifesting the Vedic culture, sometimes there is a kind of idea that Western cows are not cows, And if they're not cows, you can kill them and eat them. Just to let you know, India kills more cows than America, interestingly enough. Although its population is much bigger, so that per head is less. But in terms of numbers of cows killed, India kills more cows than America does, which is surprising. And this kind of philosophy about, well, Western cows aren't really cows, therefore we can kill them, it can feed into that political cover. So a gavaya is a bit more complicated because it's been listed here separately. So these have all got two toes. Now, what's interesting is the next verse creates a little dilemma, at least in my mind. And these are animals like a horse's hoof. Anyone knows a horse's hoof is basically just round, and it's got like if you want to shoe an ox, you've got to have two metal pieces like moon-shaped pieces, and you put on each half of the hoof. Whereas with a horse's hoof, it's like a big C. You nail it onto the hoof. So there's certain animals that we know have hooves like that: a horse, a donkey, a mule, which is between a donkey and a horse. A zebra is what we would know. We have experience of anything else. But some of these other descriptions here are a little confusing, at least to my mind. The sharaba here has been described as a bison, but even bisons actually have cloven hooves. They have two hooves. I was trying to find something that doesn't have a cloven hoof, and I couldn't find anything apart from the ones I already listed. Now, these texts, these translations, which I came to hear about recently, some of them are just taken from existing materials. So, for example, I think in the third canto, they are from the Gita press. So when they were producing these books, then Srila Prabhupada is writing the purports. The translations were taken from the Gita press publications, and then the Sanskrit editors had to change the Devanagari into the Roman transliteration and then match up the word for words with the translation. So sometimes when you study it, you find there's sometimes a mismatch. And sometimes when you look at the Sanskrit wording with your own Sanskrit dictionaries or your phone Sanskrit search, you find that some of the words don't seem to kind of balance. So this word here, sharaba, which is described as a bison, if you look at it, it's difficult to know what it is. That one Sanskrit translation was, it's an 8-legged animal. We never said anything like that. But anyway, they didn't put 8-legged animal there, they put bison. Maybe 8-legged animal would be too confusing. So anyway, some of these things are not known. Next thing, chamari is a bit more confusing because we automatically, and even what adds to the kind of intrigue, is Srila Prabhupada also indicates that the chamari is the yak. Chamari, chamara, is kind of a linguistic connection. In one place, Srila Prabhupada mentions that the chamari is also, the gavaya is also sometimes called the chamari. So again, another confusion, you could say. But a yak has cloven hooves. It has cloven hooves. It doesn't have a hoof like a horse. So whatever's listed here, you should be looking for a hoof like a horse. One round nail rather than two individual nails. In one translation of chamari, in Monia Williams, it says that the chamari is a yak. In another book which I have at home, which was many years ago, I was studying a little bit of Sanskrit with Ramanujacharya, and there's like 6 of us in his class. We had about, 10 lessons, and he got us this Sanskrit dictionary, so it's by Shivaram Apte. And there it says that the chamari is a kind of deer. Anyway, but the chamara that we're using is made of hair. So was there a deer? And this is a little kind of philosophical speculation based on this verse. Was there a deer at some point that has a long, fluffy tail that was used as a chamara? I don't know, but it's kind of a quandary. And it came to my mind because I'm doing this research about anything to do with cows or their products, so it's kind of it's a conundrum to resolve. But you'd expect that whatever is listed here has the same kind of hoof as a horse, and a yak doesn't. And it's hard to find a deer like that. Horse, donkey, ponies, zebras. Apart from that, I don't know anything else. There's probably maybe other things in the universe that we're not aware of. And it's relevant because then we're going to hear about the demigods. So I'm going to the next verse now. The other ones we had yesterday about the human beings was being described. Now we come to the devas. And this is also interesting. Actually, I'll read the Sanskrit. Deva sargas chesto vido, vibuddha pituro suraha, gandharvap sarasa siddha, yaksha rakshamsi charanaha, bhuta preta pisachascha, vidyadra kinaradayaha, daishe te vidarakyata, sargas te vishvasrik kritaha. Now, these are all been described as demigods. The translation. The creation of the demigods is of 8 varieties. The demigods, the forefathers, the asuras or demons, the Gandharvas and Apsaras or angels, the Yakshas and Rakshasas, the Siddhas, Charanas and Vidyadharas, the Bhutas, Pretas and Pisachas, and 8, the superhuman beings, celestial singers, etc. All are created by Brahma, the creator of the universe. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As explained in the 2nd canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Siddhas are inhabitants of Siddhaloka, where the residents travel in space without vehicles. At their mere will, they can pass from one planet to another without difficulty. Therefore, in the upper planets, the inhabitants are far superior to the inhabitants of this planet in all matters of art, culture, and science, since they possess brains superior to those of human beings. The spirits and jinn mentioned in this connection are also counted among the demigods because they are able to perform uncommon functions not possible for men. So here in Srila Prabhupada's purport, he just talks about one of these categorizations of demigods. These are described as this Deva Sarga. Deva Sarga is Chestovidi, 8 kinds of Devas. Now, Deva means God or towards God, and therefore it's a little surprising to see that they're being described as demigods. But you can imagine that if we were to meet any one of these, we would be completely bamboozled. And if they said they were God, we'd say, yeah, that looks like you got it down. We wouldn't know the difference. So from our little perspective, they're God. So to make a distinction here, there are the demigods who are, you could say, controlling the universe. And now there are these 8 different types described. So I thought we'll just talk about them a little bit. Vibhuda means wise, intelligent, sage, and a god, a deity. There are demigods or people in the heavenly planets who aren't necessarily universal organizers. They're kind of enjoying themselves there. So this is the kind of category that I would see these vibhudas. Narada Muni, he was among demigods, in the Bhagavad Gita is mentioned, among demigods I am Narada. So Narada Muni is classified as a demigod. He's also classified in another category, which we'll come to in a moment. And next one is the forefathers. And it comes up quite a lot. Actually, all these words here, if you do a search on Vedabase, you find a similar clustering of them. They kind of come together. They often appear at the same time. And the forefathers, we get a little insight into in the Bhagavad Gita, for example. Their forefathers, one of the issues that Arjuna raised was, well, there's an issue here. If I fight and I kill all these people, there's going to be some consequences. And one of the consequences is described in text 41. Shankaro Narakayeva Kula Gnanam Kulashyacha Patanti Pitaro Yesham Lupta Pindodaka Kriya. An increase of unwanted population certainly causes hellish life, both for the family and for those who destroy the family tradition. The ancestors of such corrupt families fall down because the performances for offering them food and water are entirely stopped. So you can read more about that in the purport. This is 141. And it's talking about this pinda, where you'd offer some food to your forefathers, and that would allow them to stay in this place for longer and to enjoy life. Now, there's not a huge amount of detail about the planet, the Pitris. In fact, there's one of the controversial changes of the Bhagavad Gita around Pitris. In the first version of the Bhagavad Gita, it put the planet of the trees, Pitris. So the editors thought it must mean the place of the trees, the planet of the trees, rather than the planet of the forefathers, Pitris. So it's a planet of the forefathers. And it appears to be a place where you go for 1 or 2 generations. And you can stay there if your children on this earth perform their various ceremonies. So again, it's a place of superior existence, and therefore it's also been described here. The next one is, any more of the forefathers? Yeah, it's interesting because when one way you can look at, well, is there a way we can understand them? And sometimes in the prayers to Lord Narasimha, when he was when Hiranyakashipu had been killed, they were trying to pacify Lord Narasimha. So sometimes the prayers were telling. And one thing they lamented, they commented about, was that Hiranyakashipu enjoyed all the offerings of the Shraddha ceremony. So rather than the Shraddha ceremony going to the forefathers, Hiranyakashipu was stealing them. So they noted that. They weren't very happy with that. So it describes again, so this is kind of relevant to sons and the grandsons. Next thing we saw here is asuras and demons. This is probably very difficult for people to understand. Why would the Lord make asuras and demons? Why would he do that? Why would he create demons or those who were against the Lord? And from us, we'd say, well, what a wonderful Lord he is. If you want to be a demon, he gives you a place to be a demon. He doesn't take away your right to be an evil person. Oftentimes people, they're perplexed. They blame religion. How you can't be true, because why does God allow suffering? Why does God allow evil people to do evil things? Well, God allows them to do evil things because they want to do evil things, and he's fulfilling their desires. Eko bahunam yo varidhati kaman. Whatever you want, he will facilitate it. So the whole Bhagavatam is full of different stories of demons and asuras. In the Bhagavad Gita, it tells us that you're either a demigod or an asura. So they're everywhere. They're all over the universe, asuras. Even on this earth, there are asuras, and there are also demigods, asuras and asuras. And then there's the Gandharvas and the Apsaras. The Gandharvas are generally described as being singers. And they're not only singers, they're also warriors. In the Mahabharata, there's some incidents where they appear. When the Pandavas were in their exile, then the Kauravas had this idea of humiliating the Pandavas. So they were turning up at a certain place and they were exhibiting all their opulence. And the Gandharvas had heard about that, so they came and interrupted the Kauravas, and the battle ensued. So they were soldiers, and they had all kind of mystic powers. Eventually, the Pandavas came into their aid. The Gandharvas were kind of capturing the Kauravas, and they were kind of humiliated. So anyway, the Pandavas came and rescued them, much to their further humiliation, and the Pandavas saved them. And the Pandavas had the ability to also wield celestial weapons. So the Gandharvas are described as, again, the heavenly. And in terms of Narada Muni, which I mentioned, in a previous Lord Brahma, he was a Gandharva. And his name is there, which I can't remember, Apalabhya or something like that. Anyone remember his name? Anyway, his name is there. What his name was in a previous Brahma's existence. And he was a Gandharva, and he was singing, and he was a bit disrespectful, so he got cursed. And therefore he became in this life. So these are celestial beings. And the other one here described is Apsaras. You don't find male Apsaras. Apsara just seems to be female heavenly damsels, celestial ladies. And oftentimes they're attributed as being beautiful singers, they're dancers, and sometimes they're even courtesans. And a famous Apsara would be Urvasi. And again, a story from Arjuna. When he was there with his father was Indra, and he was looking at Urvasi. So his father thought that Arjuna had some wrong intent towards Urvasi. Anyway, so what he did, he got a Gandharva called Chitraratha, I think his name was, to have a word in Urvasi's ear and say, go and check out Arjuna. He seems like he's interested in you. So she got all dressed up, ready to go. Remember, she's celestial, she's a courtesan, very beautiful. So she went to Arjuna and said, let's do it, in not quite a grossly way, but he said, no, mother. He called her mother. And she said that you were looking at me. He said, no, because you are related to, I think it's Purava, some generations before Arjuna. So he saw her as an ancestral mother. So when he was looking at her, he was just reveling in that kind of family connection and how important she was to one of his forefathers. So he wasn't going to submit to that activity. So naturally, if you're full of passion and it's thwarted, you get a little angry. So she cursed him. Okay, you're going to become a eunuch. Anyway, he used that in his 1 year of incognito in the forest. So he was able to become a eunuch and teach dancing. And it seems to be that it was kind of all arranged by Indra to facilitate that particular activity that was going to come later. So Urvasi, she was classed as an Apsara. The Yakshas and Yakshas, a famous one is Kuvera. Kuvera was a Yaksha, and they're known for dealing in, they take care of well things. One place described as they're like nature spirits, but they take care of opulence. And next one is the Siddhas. We probably describe Siddhas in the purport. Charanas and Vidyadharas. Charanas means, again, you don't get detailed descriptions what they look like. They're all kind of humanoid. They seem to kind of come in the category of the 400,000 humans. It seems to be that's where they're listed there in some place. And Charana means, well, like feet. So they seem to indicate their names. They're wanderers, it seems, or pilgrims. Celestial wanderers. When Chitralekha was trying to identify who someone was attracted to, she drew the Charanas, the Gandharvas, the demigod, the Siddhas. And and sometime when it's described, they'd be depicted as being offering prayers, or they're also described as singing. And they would travel in celestial airplanes. The Vidyadharas, their places, well, actually the Siddhaloka, Charnaloka, and Vidyadharaloka are described as being 10,000 yojanas below Rahu. And actually, you maybe said yojana is interesting from a car protection perspective, because yojana comes from yoke. Yoking oxen. And that's why the yojana, in one sense, it's not fixed. Srila Prabhupada oftentimes describes it as being 8 miles. But imagine you're describing traveling by natural purposes. You can say, okay, it's a day's walk. So how far is a day's walk? Well, it can depend on what you're carrying on your back. It can depend on the terrain. So a yojana is as far as an ox cart can go and return in a day, or without taking the yoke off. So how far would that be? Well, again, it depends how much load it is, how far they're carrying them, what kind of terrain it is. So therefore, there's a flexibility in it, you could say. For example, we hear that Lord Chaitanya was it 4 cubits? Lord Chaitanya, how big was Lord Chaitanya? He's described. Lord Chaitanya is described as a certain number of cubits high. And that's a cubit. So if someone, we have some very tall devotees here, and their cubits are probably, this gentleman over there with the blue, he's probably got a very big cubit. And Prabhu next to him has probably got a very small cubit. So it's flexible. So similarly, yojana has a flexibility about it. But anyway, in general, she'll probably describe it as being 8. Whereas when you get into Sariputta's analysis of the universe and how it's the cosmology, he adjusts the figure to make certain things fit or to consider various things fitting. Anyway, so yojana's there. So these Vidyaras are described there. Vid means to know, and dharana means bearing, preserving. So the Vidyadharas seem to be attributing with holding up, preserving knowledge. King Chitraketu was described as being a Vidyadhara, and he was also on the earth. And he had 10 million wives. So he wasn't ordinary. He certainly has some celestial abilities to take care of 10 million wives. And also interesting, and also in terms of cow protection, it's significant because he was so happy when one of his wives got pregnant that he donated 600 million cows. Now, that's interesting because what it means is if you're donating 600 million cows, then the total number of cows in the society must be a lot more than 600 million. He wasn't disassembling the whole bovine, he wasn't disassembling the whole society and just donating them willy-nilly. He's clearly donating surplus cows or cows that could be taken from one place and donated, which means there was billions of cows. So why is it relevant? Why am I saying it? Because today we hear there are too many cows. We hear it. There's a propaganda that the cows are somehow or other killing us because they're passing gas. And it's evil people twisting the story. Cows eat grass. They pass methane. The methane is transformed into carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is eaten by the plants. In fact, they say the world is greener now than it was before. So whatever's happening is good for plants. And so there's the whole natural cycle there. So there's not too many cows. There's not enough cows. In fact, if the whole planet of the whole world was following cow protection, you'd need more cows than there currently is. So don't accept the idea that there are too many cows. Now, obviously, one time many years ago, we had our cows grazing at the bottom, which we call the dell now, and they were stripping all the bark off the trees. And if you eat the bark of a tree, the tree will die. So if you put all the cows in a small area and eat all the bark of the trees, they will die. So it's management. It's not the fact that cows eat trees, it's the fact you put them all together. And similarly, if you go right next to the manure heap, you'll find a river of black, gooey cow dung oozings, and the grass can't cope with it. It dies. It's just too much nutrients. So it's not the problem with cow dung. It's not the problem with it. It's just basically, it's a management issue. So the issues that they're talking about are management issues, not the fact that there's cows. Anyway, so they say things. So the Bhagavatam, if you look at the Bhagavatam example, there's not too many cows. There should be more cows. And by the way, Chitraketu was donating 600 million cows. So there's not too many cows for the earth. Bhutas, pretas, and pisachas. Ghosts, ghostly beings. Pisachas are meat eaters. Demons live in the middle regions of outer space. And then we have the kinnaras. And this means, kinnara means what? Nara means human. Are they human? This is what it kind of means. Are they human? And one reference is it a man or a monkey? So it seems to indicate that in Ram's time, you can imagine you meet a monkey and he starts talking to you. You're a bit confused. Is he a man or is he a monkey? So these are what the kinnaras are. They're kind of there in between that monkey and people. Another one is called Kim Purusha. It's not described here. Well, it's kind of on others. And I believe these are winged, the kind of typical angels with wings. And there's many different others being described in the Bhagavatam. So celestial singers, etc. Okay, so this is being described here. These are now being described, placed in the universe, and multi-varieties, because people have different aspirations and different rewards, and therefore they find themselves placed in the universe. So there's some thoughts that came to me from this verse. If anybody has any questions or comments? Prabhu. Do a microphone? We're on. If you could raise your voice, because then they others. Wait, have you finished?
So, I mean, in terms of these living entities also, all of those actually, in some descriptions, fit in human species, always, even demigods, and some descriptions only human beings. So, not exactly a certain for the species.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to read out the species. Remind me, it's one reference I missed. How many there are. Prabhupada quotes it quite commonly, actually. He talks about the different species and how many there are. Where did I put it down? Here we go. He says that there are 900,000 aquatics. There are 2 million non-moving plants. There are 1,100,000 insects and reptiles. There are 1 million birds, 3 million quadrupeds, and 400,000 humans. And this is in the Padma Purana. So where these lists of demigods which I've been reading, are they part of the humans? Are they outside of all that? Yeah, it's not clear to me. I just thought maybe they're kind of part of the human category. There's no mic. You have to speak loudly.
Yes, so there are slugs. What species do they come under? They just manifest whenever there's wet weather and then disappear when it's dry.
Well, Premanava mentioned it yesterday. They're kind of in the insects categorization. He was putting them there, I presume. I mean, from what I just read there, where would you put them? They're moving. They're not quadrupeds, so there must be the 1.1 million, 100,000 insects and reptiles. I think that's probably where you'd place them. Pramanavu?
In this verses, we said that hanging those argument ignorance, because they don't require that spiritual life. But then it said the cows are about the goodness. But it's still animals, we understand that.
Yeah. They're certainly not aware. They don't come to Bhagavatam class. They're not interested in that. But one thing I did notice, we were doing a tour once of all the Goshalas in India. And we went to one of our Goshalas, and the cows were tethered. We were quite surprised. It was quite an influential Goshala. And the cows were tethered for most of the time, if not all the time. And I noted that, and I thought, well, actually the cows were in good condition. They were healthy looking, and they were very peaceful. So being in the mode of goodness means you can be satisfied with very little. So cows have this ability to be very peaceful, even though you don't give them much. So they're exhibiting that goodness. And also, we find that when you in a contact with cows, you become more in the mode of goodness. For example, if you milk the cow, you're obliged to lead a regulated life because that's what they thrive off. And therefore you can thrive by working with them. So yes, although they're in the mode of ignorance, but cows are very different because although they're listed here as a species, they're actually listed amongst the celestials. And they're often attributed with the brahmanas, the demigods, the devotees, Govinda Godvija Sura Arta Hara Avatar. Kunti prays that you descend to relieve the distress of the cows, the brahmanas, the demigods, and the devotees. So although they're in the mode of ignorance, they may not be aware of what they can do. Their companionship to us is beneficial to us, and they're celestial in that kind of region, if I use that word. Krishna Chaitanya Maharaj termed their bovinity, divinity, bovinity. That's their kind of level. So just some thoughts about your point there. Prabhu?
As far as I have read in Krishna book, it seems that both Kinnars and Gandharvas are very good singers.
Mm-hmm.
But both of them have their own talent, like Kinnar Loka, the other one is Gandharva Loka.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything what Prabhupada has said, or do we find anything in the Shastra? What's the difference in their musical talent?
I haven't come across it. Don't know. If you raise your voice.
In the verse that we recited, there were two types of creation described. I was wondering if it is the same as Sarga and Visarga, or is it something different? I didn't quite understand those two types of creation.
I don't know. I don't know that technical difference. They were just describing the prakrita was that which is happening by nature, and the Vakrita was that which is created by Lord Brahma. So I don't know the technical term, how it was used, the Visarga, I don't know.
The concept of guardian angels, like Christianity, we talk about guardian angels, and there's certain beings that God those.
Well, again, in the Mahabharata, there's an episode that comes close to that, where a being appeared to Duryodhana, and Duryodhana wasn't sure whether he was dreaming or whether it was real, and he was giving him some advice. So that kind of comes to mind. I can't give you a reference to the Mahabharata, but it's a pastime that's there, so that's close to it. And there's I think also when the Pandavas were in the forest, they came across, was it Hidimbi? And she was so beautiful, and they said, are you the kind of angel in charge of this forest or something? So sometimes the yakshas when I'm reading the references about yakshas, they seem to be in that category, like nature spirits. Interesting.
In Narada Muni's different lives as the young boy in the office, as the Gandharva and as the demigod, which of them was Prakrita, which of them was Vaikrita, and when did he have a transcendental body which allowed him to go to the spiritual world?
So I didn't get that.
Narada Muni, does he have a material body because you describe him as a demigod and Gandharva, or does he have a spiritual world, a transcendental body which allows him to go to the spiritual world?
Well, in this Brahma, he had that spiritual body where he's not limited. Where in his previous existence as a Gandharva, it seems that he was limited. But in this perfects his stage in this life, then it is not limited.
But he's the same jiva, it's not like a physician.
Same jiva. He wasn't called Narada Muni in that particular pastime. He had a different name. He was a Gandharva. But in this role, he's Narada Muni. So it's the same soul, but in a different form. Okay, we shall stop there. Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Hare Krishna. Yes. Yes. Someone told me about this translation where it came from. So I went onto the internet and I basically just downloaded it. So I could see the correlation between our translations. If you want to be as a holy study, if you want to see something with a reference, you can do it. If you play that scholastically, you want to get into the Bhagavatam as all the verses. Okay. Yeah. With Prabhupada, you definitely got no problem. Yeah, better. It's quite clear what Srila Prabhupada is saying. Hare Krishna.
Yes.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram.